Hi, Neil. We could hear you. Um, yeah, oh, okay. Yes, she can hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the October 22nd, 2025 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this virtual meeting format. For work sessions like this one, there is no opportunity for public comment, and those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the Public Webcasts and Meetings Materials webpage of the City of Eugene website. Thank you again for joining us. I now call the October 22nd, 2025 work session of the Eugene City Council to order. And I will turn it over to the city manager to introduce our first topic, which is a work session on Eugene Springfield fire governance and an update.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm assuming that my slides are showing. Yeah. Cool. All right. I know there's been a lot of anticipation about this afternoon's meeting. We have 90 minutes, and I'm going to do my best to walk through this at a pace you can take all of it in, while also leaving plenty of times for questions and discussion. You're not going to be asked to make a decision today. All right, let's make this go forward now. I knew I was going to jinx myself. All right. The presentation is longer than my normal style, so I want to be sure you and everybody know what I'm going to cover today. We've done a lot of work on fire governance, and today I'm really focusing in on two areas: a new fire district and an intergovernmental entity. There's a lot of technicalities to this work. We have some other folks online. If there's more specific questions, we get into finances. I've put this into more of a Schoolhouse Rock style. We all learn in different ways, so hopefully you'll be able to track along. It's important to note that while we are going to talk about next steps with the Eugene Springfield Fire and EMS Department, the information I'm sharing today is Eugene specific. I'm not going to cover any information about Springfield, though I do want to take a minute to just thank Springfield. It's been an incredible pleasure to partner with them and Nancy Newton in particular on working through the hiring of a chief and the work of this. They've been great partners, and I know we're lucky to have that. There are many different audiences watching today, and everyone has a different idea of what the problem is we're trying to solve. Some might be thinking, what problem? The service is great. And some have a very informed perspective of what it's like to lead and work in an environment that is providing service to a region, but is still managed by two separate municipalities. I want to share, again, my gratitude with our teams that show up every day and do great work in the field and on calls while managing the frustrations and the conflicts of two systems. The exceptional work our community is receiving in the field is supported by an incredible team working largely behind the scenes to make that work. Imagine running a merged business where you still had 2 boards of directors or 2 councils, 2 CEOs or city managers, 2 CFOs, and on and on and on. While our service is single focused, our systems are still dual due to governance. This has been happening for over a decade. Thank you, Chief Caven and your command team, and others who have led these 2 cities from the beginning, to include Councilor Randy Groves. While we can spend time on the problems we're trying to solve, I think it's actually more important to think about the future we're trying to secure. A simplified North Star is this: stable, efficient, and scalable, a governance model that ensures long-term stability and grows with the community it serves. We brought in an outside consultant with a lot of experience in this area, AP Triton, to help us investigate the different paths forward. They conducted many stakeholder interviews to include staff, elected officials, and union representatives to help us focus on the outcomes we collectively hope to achieve. These are the outcomes they distilled from those conversations. I'm not going to read through all of them, but you can kind of see the highlights of single governance, oversight by both cities, financial impacts are manageable, and importantly, our staff experience is positive. So again, I'm focusing on Eugene needs, and I'm going to probably say that more times than you're going to want me to, but that we're looking for that future that is stable and predictable. Very important that our team has the ability to innovate and plan for the future, that we're able to grow and ability to respond to that growth, and that we have the resources to sustainably fund the department. As I've said before, and will continue to say long beyond my retirement, our fire and EMS system needs more resources. It's not a service area to reactively plan for. Emergency services need to be proactively planned for and resourced. The best day to plan for your worst day is not the day after. So here's just a couple of things to set some just general parameters why I think we need more resources. We know for the last however many years, I feel like the entire time I've been on the executive team, the ambulance transport fund is always a little bit in the hole, and it's been about $1 million a year that we have had to supplement with additional general funds. So it does earn revenue, but it doesn't earn enough revenue to cover its costs. So if you think about that 1 million, you think about the need to potentially expand, that gap gets a little bit larger. Alternative response at the City of Eugene means a whole lot of things. And in this case, I'm talking about our community paramedicine system. We know that there's going to be a future gap with that. And we've all talked about the need for additional stations. We know it's about $3 million a station. You're not going to build them all at one time, but as we can get into more conversations about service needs in the future, I think the chief will tell you at some point there's a need for 3. And lastly, the AP Triton report pointed to some immediate administrative assets that might be needed that was around $5 million. So you start thinking about it, it's like we don't have the capacity to do that. So these are the 5 models that were explored by our consultant. Their final recommendation indicated that an intergovernmental entity was most feasible as our next governance model. Since that time, there's been a lot of discussion about the potential benefits of a new and independent fire district. So I'm going to cover that in a lot more detail than before. I also want to emphasize that being an individual fire department is not something to be afraid of. Eugene has invested well in our department over time, and there are pros and cons to each model, to include breaking up. The community would continue to be well served, and it's not an outcome to be feared. It's not an outcome that was preferred, but I don't think it should be feared. So let's start with the fire district and areas where I feel you've asked for more clarity. So sort of in general, I mean, a fire district, a special district is what it's called, is a new form of government. So it's a new general government that has its own separate elected body. Typically, they're single focus. So for example, you see like Willamette Lane or River Road Parks and Recreation districts. They're all funded by property tax. That's their primary and sometimes only funding source. In Oregon, they're typically rural. And in some ways, I consider it, when you talk about a district, it's essentially a line on a map. In the image to the right, you can see, a big blurb of tan in the middle, which represents that large urban area of Eugene and Springfield, surrounded by smaller, different colored areas that are rural fire protection districts. Even in this diagrammatic view, you can see we have a significant urban service area. So how do you create one? There's really two ways in Oregon to form a district. One is to form a new district, which actually, because of us being urban and not rural, really doesn't appear to be an option for us. So the second option is really to annex into an existing district, and that's where those outside edges that I just talked about come into play. There's a whole lot of things that go into forming a district. So this is not intended to be this is what comes first or next, or this is all that's counted. I'm just simply giving you a sample of decision points. So the first thing that I'll mention is that it requires existing district interest, which I'm going to cover a little bit on the next slide. City Council have multiple votes through this process. There's a Metro Plan amendment in Eugene that would need to be voted on by Eugene and Lane County, potentially Springfield, a number of city code changes. There's discussions about asset sales and agreements, requires a vote of the citizens, would require a cancellation of the IGA, and a whole lot of untangling of resources. All of this is anticipated in the report and every conversation I've had to be a minimum of a 4 to 5 year process. So today I'm going to focus in on the Willikinzie Rural Fire Protection District. Though this is uncomfortable to me, as I've had 0 conversations with anyone representing this district about any potential annexations or if they're even interested, which would be an important first step. That said, this district was the focus of a 2004 initiative in Springfield that was ultimately not successful. It's the only district that has a tax rate equal to or above what the AP Triton report recommended as a base, and is the tax rate and district that has been referenced as the goal in every single conversation I've had with anybody that is moving and pushing for a district. So let's talk about that. As I mentioned before, a new district is essentially a new general government and is subject to all the same limitations and restrictions as the city of Eugene. Frustrations with limited property tax growth and limitations are the same, and because I'm focusing on Eugene, some of the information will be very familiar. I'm going to use the tax rates of the Willikinzie Rural Fire Protection District, which has a permanent tax rate of approximately $3.07 per thousand. As you'll see in later slides, the city of Eugene's entire permanent rate is approximately $6.85 per thousand. I'm going to use what I'm calling a maximum case scenario. That is the scenario where a new taxing district is added with its full rate without Eugene or any other general government lowering their rates. While it's possible the city of Eugene can make a different decision to try to lower your rates to offset some of a new district, it would not be feasible under any scenario to offset a $3.07 rate. And even if the city agreed to absorb a future levy, you can't control what other general governments might put forward and be approved by the voters to include a supplemental levy by a new fire district. So I think it's important to look at what's possible and even likely. I also don't want to state a disclaimer on every slide, so I'm just going to say this here and then try to let it go. I'm doing the best I can to share a scale of numbers and impacts, but the data crosses tax years and the financial data is not going to be exactly right slide by slide. My intent is to share accurate and unbiased info that reflects the scale and the reality of the choices. As we narrow in on options and next steps, we'll need to continue refining the data. A decision on fire governance should not be based solely on finance. And the first question that every single person brings up or talks about is finances, property tax limits, and compression. So I'm just going to walk through. You've seen this slide before, but as a reminder, compression was introduced by Measure 5 in 1990, and it limits the rate of taxation by government bodies, both by education and by total general government. We're focusing on government, the general government, so the total rate is $10 per thousand of real market value is a limit the legal limit of what can be charged to any property. So what compression is essentially taxes that can't be collected if the tax rates push a property above those limits. We're going to walk through this in a lot of different examples, so I'm just going to keep moving. Most taxpayers are unaware if their property is compressed when you get a tax bill, which we're going to look at. You just see what you're being charged. You don't know if you're in compression. In fact, you don't even know what the individual rates are that you're being charged by different government entities. So I'm going to walk through actually 5 different examples, so it's going to feel really long. But one is to set the basic understanding of how this happens on an individual property basis, one that shows it how it plays out in a neighborhood, and one that's more specific to a commercial property. We all take in information differently. It's complex, and I've had to look at this multiple different ways to completely understand it. So starting with a property tax statement on an individual property. If you're a property owner, you're familiar with this. If you aren't, I hope that my approach will shed light on how this works and how it might impact you as a tenant. The City of Eugene and any new taxing district such as fire falls under the general government category of your property tax statement. I've outlined this in red, and this is where we are going to focus. Your bill is made up of more than that, and I'm not going to cover that. It's as if we're looking at your water and electric bill, and I'm only going to talk about the electric part. On the left of your bill, you find both the real market value and the assessed value of a property. I'm going to refer to those 2 values over and over and over as we go through the financials, as they are the basis of an individual's tax limits or where compression happens and actual taxes are owed. I apologize, I'm going to repeat this multiple times, but it's a simple and important takeaway. Tax limits are calculated on the real market value, which is that green arrow, and that is going to show up on all the slides. Actual taxes are calculated on assessed value. After we understand how this works on a few properties, I'm going to walk through some system-wide impacts. So let's focus first on this first residential property. Sorry. This red box is the same as the last slide, so I just pulled it straight over, and I've added in the individual rates from each body that results in what you see in the tax bill. As you can see, the total of all general governments currently in most of Eugene is basically 66 per thousand. As mentioned earlier, the Measure 5 cap on general government is $10 per thousand, so it seems like we're close to being in compression to many. It's been a long-standing value of the City of Eugene and our regional partners, as evidenced in many presentations on levies, to stay within the $10 cap. This has made really good sense because it was the intent of the legislation to manage the cost of general government, and there were many years where real market value and assessed value were closer than they are for many properties today. You'll see some examples of that in just a minute. But it's important to remember that the limit is based on $10 per thousand of real market value, not assessed value. So on this property, the actual property tax limit is currently just over $7,500. So on this property, if you added a new fire district at the rate of $3.07, the taxes owed would increase to over $6,500 and would still be under the Measure 5 limit of $7,500. I'm going to show you this exact same math on this next slide. It's the exact same thing. General government collection limit calculated on the real market value, showing that $7,516. That's, you can't go above that this year. Your actual taxes are calculated on assessed. So here I'm showing your actual taxes based on our current $9.66 rate and what that would be with a new $12.72 rate, showing that you would have a tax increase of $1,574 on this property, as you would not hit compression until you get to $7,516. This is a graph showing that exact same property over time. To orient you to this graph, the dark blue line at the top is the real market value, which is a combination of the 2 blue lines below that represent the improvement value and the land value. The red line is the assessed value. As you can see, in 2025, the RMV, real market value, is well above the assessed value, which allows for more tax growth before hitting compression or tax collection limits. Again, the $10 limit is applied to RMV, which is the dark blue top line. In 2025, that looks great, but you don't have to look back very far to see where that would not be the case. Our history is a good indicator of future risks. Any dips in value that bring that top line down means taxes that can't be collected. If that happens, all the governments listed in the list I showed you with the red box would lose revenue. So let's look at a very similar set of examples, but in a neighborhood where you can literally throw a ball from house to house. This example is from the same set of general government services as referenced in the earlier tax bill. I'm using it to show you what happens if a new taxing district is added and how that might or might not trigger compression on individual properties. In a later slide, I'll show you more specific tax impact for these specific properties. So for this, we're looking at whether or not that new overall rate of $12.72 essentially would trigger compression. First property, yes, the new rate would exceed the legal tax limits. That property would actually be in compression. It would pay more taxes, but it would still leave $103 that we would not be able to collect. The next door neighbor would not exceed the tax limits. In fact, when you calculate how high that rate could get before you would hit compression, you could actually run that bottom number that I showed you as 1274 up to 1457 before you would lose. And then if you literally go kind of across the street where you might even trick or treat, you can go all the way up to $17.16 before that property will be in compression. Several important reasons why I'm showing you this. This is a point in time measurement that changes annually. There's a significant variation from property to property, creating a lot of disparity and inequities in how services are funded. Not a new issue, just one to be aware of. And our region has been really good about keeping our overall rates below $10, while Portland, on the other hand, hovers closer to 15. And this is why I think we need to talk about what could potentially happen. These are those same three properties. The first one was the one I showed you in compression, and then the other two. Same slide I showed you earlier showing that history. And you can see you don't have to look back very far to see that there were times in there where we would have been losing significant revenue. I'm going to walk through a commercial example in the same way to show the calculation and the impact. So exact same thing. This is a large commercial property out West 11th. You do the same thing. You take the real market value and you multiply that by $10 per thousand to get to what that total tax limit is. Same thing here. If you calculate the value on 965, you can see where what the taxes are, and if you raise it to 1272, what that number is. And you can see on this one, the actual 324 is higher than the limit, legal limit for this property. And what that means is that you would, while taxes would go up a little bit, and again, I'm going to show that example in a minute, you would lose $69,475. You know what? You can see it. Those are taxes that wouldn't be collected, and this is what people talk about being lost to compression. While redundant, I'm going to show all of these examples side by side before I go to a more system-wide look. So again, this is the very first property I showed you, showing you the rate and taxes at our current rate, the rate and taxes at our new rate, and how that would impact a property owner by year and by month. The second house, this is the one that was built in 1964 that has a really large gap, and what their impact would be. The next two neighbors, and then finally the commercial property, where you can still see all of them have an increase this year. Again, it's a point in time. So this plays out across the city and by property class. When we presented to you about the Oregon property tax system, we shared this slide when we talked about the change property ratio. As a reminder, the change property ratio is a countywide average of assessed value to real market value for properties within the same classification. It's a good framework for looking at how compression might play out across the city and across development types. And as you can see, residential multifamily housing are going to have the most room for growth and where taxes could go up the most. And as you move down into industrial and business property, more likely on average to be in compression and have revenue loss. When you apply that geographically, you can see how much variation there is across the city, with darker colors being more likely to be compressed. Those tend to be more industrial and commercial property. Given all of that information, let's look district-wide at what is possible in terms of revenue generation with compression. In this map, the green line representing the existing Willa-Kinsey Rural Fire Protection District has been carried around the Eugene area. For this area, we estimate a new district with a permanent tax rate of $3.07 would generate about $56.4 million annually. In a district, property tax is the primary form of revenue. As we know, in Eugene, the growth rate of property taxes has been below 4% annually for a significant amount of time. We'll have an updated number soon as we receive this year's property tax information from Lane County and we update our forecast. But looking at our own permit and construction data, I anticipate this number will follow the same trend of sub 4% growth. As we talk about the department budget existing, we've shifted to a biennium, so I'm going to use this as a rough comparison. So for example, rough again, because there's always some numbers that don't carry over year, about $112 million for the biennium, and that would represent about 7.6% growth. All right. So one more thing about compression, just as a reminder, this is the same red box. Remember that the education has a $5 per thousand limit. General government has a $10 per thousand limit. And the bonds, capital bonds, don't actually fall under those same compression limits. So we're not going to talk about those two. We're just going to talk about the general government rates. And as a reminder, when we do talk about compression, because I'm just going to show you a couple of numbers, what gets compressed first is the local option levies. And I've indicated those for both Eugene and Lane County, as they will, when we look at this next number, you'll see why that is. So that $56.4 million annually would cause this level of compression across the entire system under my maximum case scenario where no one's voluntarily lowering the rates. So you can see the city of Eugene loses about 2.4 million. A lot of that is local option levies. Lane County, 1.75. The fire district actually generating and also in compression in their first year, and the Upper Willamette Soil and Water District. And just as, again, a reminder, schools are not impacted by this. This is the department's budget over the last two biennium. The general fund line on top is the best apples to apples comparison. As you can see within the city, the general fund number is lower than what I previously showed you that the district would bring in, but it does have higher growth. There are a couple of reasons for that, but the easiest is that we allocate more resources to supplement the growth and needs of the department. Even in a cut year across the city, their resources grew beyond our revenue growth. Also notable is the other revenues, such as the community safety payroll tax, which the district employees would continue to pay to Eugene, but would not be receiving in revenue for their services. In other words, unless the city decided to voluntarily give a new government your payroll tax, the new government would have to fund that service with their property tax revenue. When you look at just the top line, which is the general fund for a new district versus the city of Eugene, the financial driver for much of the discussion about the district is the $12 million in annual new capacity. And we're going to come back to that. That said, there's a lot of things other than finances to consider. One of the interesting facts is that, as you see, even though on the lower table, our population, when you look at Eugene and Springfield together, we represent just under 74%. Our assessed value is over 76%. As you move from a city service to a regional service, the costs shift. And because of our higher AV value, Eugene residents will pay more than a cost distributed by population. It's also important to remember the other items I previously shared as desires for a new model. That is not the right slide. We'll come back to that. All right, I'm going to switch now to an intergovernmental entity. There's going to be a lot less slides here because it's definitely an area that we have more understanding. It's an area that consultants spent time with you, and it's also a model we have some familiarity with. So an intergovernmental entity is a public body and a municipal corporation. It has power and responsibilities delegated by the cities to include you could give the power and delegation to raise revenue through fees. It would have a new board governed by existing representatives. Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission is a similar entity, but I'm going to cover that in the next slide, where you have each local government having a elected representative and then also having community members. They're typically single service. They're funded by the cities. They don't have the ability to raise taxes, but they could do fees. I say MWMC is close but different, and that's because as we're imagining an IGE for fire and emergency services, we're actually imagining it as a step beyond what we've done with Metropolitan Wastewater. Metropolitan Wastewater continues to have employees in Eugene and employees in Springfield, and it's easier to do that because the operations are separate. In this one, we're actually imagining the IGE would be the single employer and that the Eugene employees and Springfield employees would now be employed by the IGE. The chief would actually report to that new board and not to the city managers. It's not part of the city. It's still supported by the city. But it is a separate entity. It has separate systems, and they tend to have an urban focus. IGE formation has a lot of steps. Again, just a sampling of points. There'd be a lot of work in terms of even starting to develop an MOU and deal points for how you would get to an eventual IGA that forms an IGE. There's discussion about service levels, member fees, who's on the governance board. And in fact, when the consultant gave us their report, they gave us an 8-page to-do list of like literally these are all the steps you would have to go through, and it's 8 pages front and back. Still have to have discussions about equipment and assets. There's new systems and shifts you still have to untangle. So while it may not be 5 years, it's certainly greater than 2. In an IGE, when we talk about revenues, we start with the city's revenues. Again, I'm going to use the maximum case scenario, which in this case uses an assumption that the department maintains its current funding levels. Given the North Star and department and community needs, an IGE would need an additional funding source. As an example only, I'm going to talk through what that might look like if you were trying to match the capacity of a new district by raising an additional $12 million with new revenue. One of the advantages of an IG is they still have the stability of 2 cities' support and could be given the authority to establish and set fees to run more like a utility model. This is similar to MWMC, who recommend and set rates that both cities approve, usually by consent. As you know, I've been an advocate of shifting our mindset and management of fire and EMS to more of a utility model. It's a 24/7 operation you can't shut off, and our community depends on it scaling with growth and need. It's a service that needs a more proactive planning and approach. As you can see here, I've placed IGE in the growth column, as that could be a future IGE decision on how that would grow. Lastly, before I leave the slide, I want to remind everyone this option is currently available to the city and will be a tool to generate capacity as a single entity and one that could scale up over time. And as you can see here, these are numbers we've pulled from previous work we did on fire funding. And shows what happens across a typical household. So if we go back and we look at the examples we walked through before, based on the research we did during the last fire funding conversation, this is the impact to these properties to generate $12 million annually in new capacity. The reason for this is a fee is established by account holder, which is broader than property owner. As you might recall, fees are paid across the system and include properties that are exempt from property taxes, such as the City of Eugene, nonprofits, the U of O, etc. It's based on square footage, which was considered to be an equitable way to look at the cost of fire services. This is how this compares when looking at a typical residential and commercial property, when you're looking at a fire district and a fee. But ultimately, please know my eventual recommendation to you will not be solely based on finance. In the end, we will revisit priorities set by multiple stakeholders to determine the best model. While this will go on for years, I intend to make a recommendation to you in December. We have a few touch points here with you today, with the review panel. And again, this will continue. Today, I'd actually like to hear your feedback and understand what you might need to know or understand better prior to my making that recommendation in December. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, City Manager. Very much appreciate that update. A lot of work over a lot of years. I will now open up the floor to council discussion and see Councillor Groves first in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, City Manager, for that presentation. I think it's probably about as clear as you can make it. It's a very complicated issue. Just to be clear, when we're talking about the cost of a district, you are adding in additional revenue that's needed for trying to catch up to the last 44 years where our growth has been stagnant, correct?
So, no. Well, so when I'm doing the district, I'm just showing you what that rate would generate across Eugene, and it would generate $12 million more than what we're currently putting in general fund. That's what I was trying to show. It won't, I don't know actually if it's enough to get above. It could potentially have to levy.
That's what I was trying to get at, but it would help with the catch up. And whatever we do, I mean, we need to take into account that our resources have not kept up with the pace of growth and the capacity limitations we're experiencing. I also want to thank Chief Caven and his team for continuing to make this thing work, even though it's awkward and cumbersome. And I want to thank our firefighters for continuing to be professional and just always seem to be able to pull things together to make them work. But for me, one of the things I will be looking at is some form of plan for catch up. I don't know that it all can be done in 1 year, but some way, regardless of the form of governance we end up with, that happens. The other question I wanted to ask was, again, looking at the district as opposed to the IGE, the district, none of those numbers were taken into account what's already coming from the general fund to the fire department, correct? Okay, correct. You were muted,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
I could
correct.
read
That's
your
why-
lips.
That's why I called it the maximum case scenario.
Got it. Thank you. And again, the 12 million that would be included in the district, that is in keeping with the basic premise that AP Trident reported back, correct?
I guess I'll just leave my audio on. The 12 million that's in the district is just, I'm just pulling that out as an example of, I think it's what, people have been focusing on is like, we get more money in a district. And so I'm just showing that if you look at our general fund that we're contributing, the district would actually generate more property tax than our general fund. But that's not based on anything in the Triton report. And then I tried to use what happens if you need to generate that $12 million for growth and you do it in the IGE and what that costs. So I think that decision about what a district is going to generate that money on day one, like whether you need it all in day one or not. And the IGE, you would be able to ratchet that up as you want to catch up and grow.
Do you have any sense of what the public's appetite would be for this, or is that something we're going to need to be doing some polling on?
Yeah, I haven't talked to the public at all about a district.
I don't have a good feel for it myself, but I do know that when we were talking about the fire services fee, quite a few people that I spoke with at least said that they would support more money going to the fire department, but one of their complaints was a smaller percentage would actually be going to the fire department to help with the fact that we just haven't had any growth to keep up with population growth. I think that's all I'm going to ask for now. I probably will want a second round, but I'll wait and see what else is asked and what the answers are. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Sarah.
Councillor, you've traded positions, but Councillor Clark, you're now showing next in the queue, and then Councillor Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say thank you to Sarah and the staff that helped her for all of the work involved in that presentation. Having worked on the subcommittee with Councillor Groves for a while, I know the complexity of this, and that was a very difficult presentation to get together and put out there in a way that's understandable for everybody involved. I I would say first and foremost that I agree entirely with Randy's comments. And more importantly to me, I would say it's important, I think, that the community knows their fire department and their fire chief have been working very long and very hard with a system that is not giving them the best support that they need in order to serve all of us the best way. And it is my belief that they need a single organization that manages them. They need the resources to do the job more effectively without having to scrimp and get by with things that are less than optimal for taking care of people's health and safety. And it's important for us to give them the structure that can provide that kind of support. It is my opinion that a big part of that is financial, and that we haven't grown the fire department with the resources over time to do the job that we're asking them to do. And by comparison, I would only say that look back 20, 25 years, and our library was a one-story building on 13th and Charlton with a couple of dozen people working there. And today the library looks very, very different. And the library is very important to the people of Eugene. But I would venture to say, so's the fire department. And we haven't grown that in the same way we have grown other parts of the city. And I think it's time we re-examine that, whichever way Sarah ends up recommending that we move forward, how we recommend balancing what priority our service delivery is matters in this discussion as well. Thank you.
Councilor Kaczynski.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for the presentation, and to everyone who put work into this. I know it's been something a lot of people have been working on for a long time. I want to say that many of the financial questions I had were answered by your presentation. And so thank you. It was very thorough. I also really appreciated discussing the potential revenue options if there was an intergovernmental entity that took over this, because I know that one of the things reading through the consultant report was that there wasn't a discussion of how you would handle increased funding for this. And so I appreciated that option being put in there. My question is just to clarify, under either of these options, it would involve setting up independent and separate sort of administrative structures. Is that right? Like independent HR, IT, finance support. And so they wouldn't have, under either of these, they wouldn't have that same challenge where they've got two CFOs and two budgets they've got to do.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. And then the other question I had that's a little bit more, you talk about the member fees as part of the intergovernmental agency, is that like the board of that would say, like, per person in Eugene's going to give us $10 or whatever the number is? Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, I think that's how they imagined it. I called it member fees because, in an intergovernmental entity, and as Dan from AB Triton talked about, you create that entity and then it has the ability to grow over time. So if somebody else wanted to join, you could potentially talk about that. But yeah, it would be establishing sort of that rate, that sort of base rate at which you're doing your service.
Okay. And then I think as we continue this discussion, one thing that I would find helpful is discussion as we're looking at these is what are sort of downsides or major barriers that may come up for either of these options. So if there's something that, you're looking at and you're like, I just don't see how this piece is going to work, that would be helpful to know. And I think that could come from a lot of different places. I know Councilor Groves was talking about sort of public appetite being potentially a barrier for some of these options, or a support for some of these options. If there's a sense that Springfield would never agree to a certain thing. And so it means that, we'd be doing this on our own and what the implications of that would be. So I think just understanding where are some of the places where this could kind of go off the rails with either of the two options would be helpful. Because we're talking some longer timelines. So thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Keating. Councillor Keating, you're still muted. And now you are also frozen. You may need to turn off your video.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but you're frozen. Would you turn off your video?
Is that better?
It's still frozen on our
Mayor, can you
screen.
hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. City Manager, thank you for the presentation. It's clear-eyed, and I greatly appreciate the in-depth overview. I'm wondering how much our Eugene Springfield Fire Team, and I want to couch this conversation in my gratitude and support and appreciation for our first responders and our ESSF leadership as well. How much or how often are our first responders responding to calls to provide support in that Willikinzie Fire District already? And if there's measures 5 and 50 reform seen at the state level, how might that loosening of compression restraints change the calculus and change the conversation about a potential, not creation of a fire district, but folding into an existing fire district if, say, the compression is a $12.50 or a $50, is not constrained at a $10.
I'm gonna split this question up. So one thing I didn't clarify is Willikinzie is a taxing district. They contract with Eugene Springfield Fire for service. So it's kind of an interesting, so Chief Caven would have to answer the how often we're going into that district. It's a pretty small area south of Springfield, North Eugene. The second piece around how future property tax reform could impact, I'd have to really think through that, because it could actually make it so that both cities have the ability to better fund their departments as well. So. Caven, do you want to take a stab at that Willikinzie?
Yeah, and Sarah's right. Willikinzie is one of 7 districts that contract with the cities for service. And in totality, there's not a lot of population out there. And so it's below 1,000 total calls per year that we service in their areas.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, City Manager. I'm assuming I'm still frozen. You can hear me. I'll give up the rest of my time and keep myself on mute and with my camera off.
Thank you, Councillor. And we heard you okay once your screen was off in case you come back in a second round. Councillor Zelenka.
Yeah, thank you. I too want to appreciate the work and the service that the firefighters, first responders give to our city, especially when you need it. That's when they're really, really valuable. Hopefully you never need them. This is super complicated, and hats off to the city manager for trying to make this as simple as possible, but it's not simple. It's very complicated. I think the fire fee went, because it was an increase in revenue from taxpayers, is the cause of why it met its demise. Reluctant to go to the other rhetorical reasons for it, because I think people were really about the money, not about how it was done. Question I had about the district. So if the tax rate in the Willikinzie Fire District were to be assumed for the city, or both cities, and it would create $12 million. That's incremental dollars. And so what would that be used for? And would that create an increase in service?
Not necessarily. So I apologize for using that number. I'm just trying to be like, what is the advantage of a district? And the immediate advantage that I could see when I'm looking at it is like, oh, it generates this, it's a couple of things. It generates a little bit more revenue, and it has its own independent elected body and its own independent single focus. And I think that is appealing to some. So but that rate would have to include, it's not fully, like we would have to give you a lot more detailed analysis around, what would they have to pay in terms of administration? It's unclear how much of a service impact you would get with that.
If any.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And you wouldn't be, and again, this body would not be in control of that. A new elected board would be determining where those resources go and how they'd be invested, where new stations go, where new stations move. That wouldn't be a city council discussion.
Right. The city of Eugene would lose control over all of that. It would be invested in that new board. But if I got slide 21 correct, if the Willitt-Kenzie Fire District rate were put on top of what we're already doing, then in most instances, you would see an increase in people's taxes that they would pay. Unclear whether or not they would get a increase in service. Maybe, maybe not. My screen just went black. Oh, yeah, thank you. And for some in compression, that would put some in compression, and we would see a loss in City of Eugene revenue, and which would require a cut in services of about $2.4 million a year. Did I sum that up? That very complicated analysis. You're muted, Sarah.
Yes, but again, I use that maximum case scenario. So the city would also, in the maximum case scenario, you weren't voluntarily reducing your rate. So the fire department leaves and you would actually have more resources. So you probably could absorb some of that without having to make any sort of cuts.
Oh, with cuts in, because we're not paying for fire department anymore.
Correct.
So it might offset.
Lane County would be in a different
They would be
mode altogether because they wouldn't get the offsetting resources.
right. They would see that $1.75 million cut, right? And for the IGA, kind of the same. If you increased it to get the $12 million, where you'd see tax increases, maybe an increase in service, maybe not, but it would be less impactful than a district, is what I gathered.
Well, you wouldn't see a tax increase; you'd see a utility fee.
Yeah, you'd see a fee, but amount of money people pay out. But they don't have to use the whole amount, right?
Correct.
In the district, it could be. But if you're not trying to get more revenue, then it's just about having its own entity direct the fire department's work.
Yeah.
Okay. You got it. Thanks.
Added to myself to the queue at the end of this first round, and I know at least one Councillor Groves, has mentioned a second round. Thank you, Councillor. I have a handful of questions that some of which come out of seeing that incredibly helpful presentation. Thank you, City Manager. You did a really incredible job of covering depth and breadth of information, and it is a really complex question that's before us. My first question has to do early on. I appreciated your framing of this as a type of utility, especially because of that 24/7 must respond, needs to be available aspect. The slide that you shared after introducing the goal of stability, efficiency, and scalability, very helpful as a reference. But speaking to resources and the need for additional resources, now our ambulance fund is currently distressed, and you mentioned the $1 to $2 million think, a year gap. That was a question. And then also the 1.2 million gap with alternative response. Are those two categories of resources, areas where the general fund is currently sort of backstopping some of that need? Can you just clarify? I wasn't quite sure I understood what you were saying at this point.
The ambulance shortfall, the general fund backstops, and I'll let the community paramedicine gap that we're seeing is currently, and I'm pretending like I'm a fire chief. We have some initial funding for that, but we'll have an eventual gap that we'll have to figure out how to solve.
Thank you for that clarification. The stations investments needed in the future, 3 stations at about 3.1 million each, and then what looked to me like maybe deferred maintenance kind of asset investments, those 2 would be a different category. Those aren't currently being captured the same way.
Again, this was just a high level sampling of the assets on the far right, the 5 million. We were trying to reflect what was in the AP Triton report around there, saying you probably need these 5 new administrative positions and this and that, and some of the deferred piece, but it's not fully comprehensive. It's mostly being used for me as an indicator to tell you the system needs more resources no matter which direction you go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was the extra clarification that I wanted to confirm with you. Next 2 questions might be a little bit simpler, maybe not. Do any of these governance structures affect our community's protection from wildfire? Do any of these government structure decisions alone change how exposed or not exposed our community is to the risk of wildfire?
Chief, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, no, I'll take the stab at it. Along with some of the other, initiatives, the gap funding and the stations, whatever path we choose needs to account for future investment in the wildfire space as that changes and as we grow and develop the program. Right now, that program does receive funding from the community safety payroll tax, and plausibly within the IGE, we would keep that and have a new revenue stream to address future needs in that space. In either of those 2 options, there is the possibility for further collaboration with regional partners to strengthen wildfire. But again, that's more down the road. So both of them provide an opportunity for that. I think the revenue structure that comes with an IGE might give us more flexibility in identifying, explaining, and selling that to the community. So that's a long-winded answer to
not long-winded at all, Chief. Thank you for explaining to that. That's an area where in the few conversations I've had within the community, there's some concern about, and question, I would say some confusion, not concern about whether or not this particular decision, not that other decision about resources, is the one that's most relevant to wildfire risk. Third question is maybe for our next conversations or future conversations, but how can we be thinking about when with the district model? I know we're focused on the city of Eugene, but the difference in number of assets, sort of different ways that our 2 communities have invested over decades in this resource. How does that get captured into this process? Because I think the city of Eugene and city of Springfield, I think both of our communities try to live out our values in our decisions, but in some ways they've been really different over decades.
Yeah, I won't be able to answer that well today. I think that's an area that we're going to have to continue working on collectively. I think Springfield is scheduled to have this conversation mid-November-ish, and then we'll come together to be able to provide more comprehensive discussion. But that's a challenge, to be honest.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll look forward to that conversation. Councillor Groves.
Mayor, Councillor Ye just raised her hand for
I'm
first
sorry.
round.
Councillor, please. Councillor Ye, go ahead.
No worries.
Thank you. Actually, my question was the mayor's last question, so I'll just say thank you so much for the hard work on the presentation. It was a little dense, but I think I got it. I really enjoyed everyone's questions as well. I guess I just will do one clarifying. So the way I understand it in my brain, if we move to a fire district, at least for the finances, people will not be paying an equal share due to the way our tax system. I mean, this is like all things that come from property taxes are this way. It's just not an equal system. Different people will be paying a different amount, not necessarily based on the true value of their property.
I think that's accurate to say, and I think that is, I mean, it's a current situation.
Yeah, it's an ongoing problem, right? Okay. I just wanted to make sure I got that straight. Okay, then all my other questions were answered, and thank you, Mayor, for bringing up the last one for me. Thank you.
Let's see, Councillor Groves and Councillor Zelenka. I thought I had you both, Councillor Groves and then Councillor Zelenka.
My hand went down for some reason. Thank you, Mayor. I want to start with adding to what Chief Caven said in response to your question, Mayor, about wildland. I would say we actually are better protected than we were before the merger, just because our crews are all trained the same, they're equipped the same. I started my fire service career here in 1980, and we actually had adapters so we could even work with Springfield, and Springfield had adapters so they could work with us. We had different size supply lines for our hose, our hydrants, the ports on them for the large port was a different size. And I always equated mutual aid. It's like starting a football game and having a second football team show up halfway through the first quarter. They have different plays, different terminology, and you run into each other. And it's not like that post-merger functional consolidation, because everybody, again, is trained the same way. They go through the same hiring processes. Everybody's interchangeable. The equipment's the same. So, and our standard operating procedures, our hose evolutions, our ladder evolutions are all the same. So, I mean, that is one of the real positives to the system. And we were never intended to stay where we are now. It was always intended that it would be one system, regardless of what the form of governance was. The other thing I wanted to add is, one of the reasons the firefighters are pushing the district is the sense of autonomy. Now, I think we can accomplish that through the IGE piece, but that is why they push that. It's a very distinct, clear model, and it's worked in other places. So that's a piece there. A question I have for the city manager, Sarah, if recognizing we need to get more resources on the street in order to serve the public. And I will add, I keep hearing people say it's been like this for 25 years. That's wrong. It's been like this for 44 years. I remember when we took over the ambulance in 1981, and May of 1981, and we have grown by one firefighter per shift on the Eugene side since that time. One firefighter. Going back to what Councillor Clark said, I support the library as well, but the library's increased in size many hundreds of percent. Your fire department has not. Question for the city manager, though. I'm assuming should we decide to start adding resources, we could take and come up with a dedicated fire fee to pose to the voters, or however we process it. We could do that before either a district or the IGA were formed, correct?
Yeah, you can do that at any time.
I do think that,
I mean, that is a way to generate some amount of revenue and start to make that shift before a multi-year process.
Thank you. I think that's something important we need to look at. In speaking with Chief Caven, response times are degrading. Thank you very much.
Councillor Zelenka.
Yeah, a couple of questions. How three different areas play out under the two different scenarios. If the district or the IGA want to increase revenue, do they have to get a vote of the people that are in the district
So the
Or
district, yes.
by the city, both cities?
The only way the district would be able to generate revenue beyond the permanent taxing rate would be a levy voted on by the people. An IGE would have the ability to, a city could continue to levy and contribute, or could authorize the IGE to set and establish and collect fees.
Does the district have the ability to, without a vote, go all the way up to that max that they have in their, as their maximum rate?
Well, they'll
Right from the
get their
get-go.
max. The permanent rate will be the rate on day one.
Day one.
Yeah.
But they don't have to spend all
Community has to vote on that. Both community, the district, Will Kinsey District, and whichever community, if Eugene just was the only city, Eugene voters would have to vote on that. And then if they wanted additional resources in the future, you would vote on that.
right, to form the district. But once it's a one big district with Springfield and Eugene voted for it and Springfield didn't, it would still occur in Springfield because it's all in the same district after the formation of the district.
I see the city attorney shaking her head.
Yeah. I think you're saying, so are you asking the scenario if everybody says they want to be a district and one community says yes and one community says no?
No, they say yes to the district, and then they want to increase the amount of revenue, so they have to take a vote. Springfield votes no, Eugene votes yes. But
It's not like that. Once you're a district, it's a district-wide vote.
yeah, so
In fact, Eugene could say, I mean, wherever the people are saying yes will be applied across the district.
right. So even though Springfield would vote no, for instance, in that scenario, they would still be imposed on them. Okay, the assets. You didn't talk about the assets. This is hundreds of millions of dollars. Do we know what that number is, Chief Caven, of how much assets the fire departments have?
I don't think we have that number for today, but yeah, we own property and equipment and buildings and all the things.
Yeah, it's got to be hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's not anywhere in this analysis
No.
as included. If it were included and the district had to buy the assets, then that cost would be included on top of and eat up a lot of money because you'd have to pay that debt service. I'm assuming you'd have a 20 or 30 year bond to be able to do that. And I'll just point out all the previous intergovernmental transfers that we've had recently, both on Civic and the new City Hall, they were not free. They were paid for. Maybe not. So how would the payout, the difference in pay between Springfield and Eugene firefighters play out in these two scenarios?
You're talking about their payroll pay?
Payroll pay, yeah, because Springfield has
Yeah,
a lower
they would
payroll.
become, I think we would have to negotiate, the IGE would, I think, have to negotiate a new contract with
With
IAFF,
everybody.
IGE employees, and their pay rate would be the same. They'll have a single employer.
And my guess is that Springfield would go up and Eugene would stay the same.
Can I jump in here real quick
Yeah.
and just clarify that we've been under the same labor contract since 2014. We make the same amount of money. The only
Why did the report
real-
say there was a differential?
there's a
benefits?
differential in how and when, which create challenges. And then the biggest discrepancy between the two is the benefits.
Right.
So-
That's pay to
Right.
me. Yeah. So the benefits cost is really different. Like they said, $1.3 million a year different, if I recall.
Yeah, I mean it's deep in the reasons why. We did an analysis when we brought those contracts together of the total investment for the plans. The plans are built differently. They have different benefits. Springfield has access to a clinic. I mean, there are things that are in there, but from a base level, at the end of the day, what a firefighter gets paid and their total compensation is near identical when you stack up what those benefits cost. They're just different.
But in an intergovernmental entity, they'll have a single employer and they'll have a single set of benefits, and they will be the same. That discrepancy will go away,
Right. And it'll increase costs.
potentially.
Yeah, I guess when we were discussing the fire fee, I was initially thought fire fee might be a good idea to increase revenue, but also that we could use the headroom before compression to be able to use that for a bond or even a capital bond to do fire stations. Either way, there are other mechanisms to get more money into the pot for firefighting. But I guess all of this kind of boils down to willingness of Eugene and Springfield taxpayers to raise their taxes or fees. We don't really know that. And is there a way for you to come back to us with more information about that?
Is that suggesting the polling that's been mentioned once before?
Yeah. However, yeah. So I think you do a poll in the next couple of weeks. But.
Not yet. That's unclear to me, but I think it could be part of an implementation plan.
Councillor Evans, I see your hand is up, but also not functioning in the normal way.
Yeah, my virtual hand's not functioning, Mayor, but can I, there's a couple of questions that I have on this that particularly with regard to the IGE that I'm interested in, not just from the long-term reorganizational aspect, but to address some of our more immediate needs in fire. And that would be, what would an IGE's bonding capacity look like if we affected an IGE and merged those entities, Eugene, Springfield, and Willikinzie? Would that be a vote of all of those entities together, or would that just be an individual vote for Eugene, an individual vote for Springfield, and then an individual vote for Willikinzie?
So an IGE Willikinzie would not be a part of. That would be a separate.
Okay, I'm getting that part.
And I think there's two different. There's a complex answer, and this is all part of why there's an 8-page to-do list of putting together an IGE. In one, currently there's, MWMC does a lot of their capital construction and they pay it with their utility rate. So they don't always have to bond. And there's another scenario where both cities are bonding on behalf of. So it can be a couple of different ways. Catherine, you're welcome to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it can be done a couple of different ways.
Okay. The second question would be, how, under an IGE, how would a levy for operations work? Would we, again, be a single entity that would go out for, a levy, for instance, to support operations, increase firefighters' pay rates, all of that?
So an IGE doesn't have taxing authority, so an IGE wouldn't be able to put a levy out. But when I talked about the membership fees, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, once those membership fees are set, and this is the cost, whatever jurisdiction could choose to have a levy to supplement that or a fee to supplement that. I think in an ideal situation, if you want to run it like a utility model, you would want to have a fee that is set by the IGE that establishes that for that growth. But you could do it a number of different ways, and we'd have to, again, that's part of the setting it up.
So that would be a new fee on top of what we would do in terms of an IGE merger model. Am I mixing apples and oranges here?
A little bit, or you've got two different varieties of apples. The IGE, so all I've said is, like, no matter what you do, even if we stay a single department, you're going to need to find more resources. In an IGE model, you could do that through a fee potential. You could do that through continuing to levy. We haven't levied for fire, but you could. Springfield does. I wouldn't recommend a levy. And I mean, I guess when I get around to making a recommendation, a levy is time limited. It's a 5-year funding source. And I think you're thinking about
It needs to be renewed.
yeah, and if you want certainty in how you're providing that service, I think you'd want a more steady stream.
So it'd make more sense for us to have a standardized fire fee that would not have any limitations on renewals or any of that kind of thing.
That would be ideal. I know that's, that's
Okay.
your policy decision.
That's helpful, city manager. I just, am thinking about, current issues that we have and our ability to meet the need in case we have some kind of disaster in the near term, and our fire department's ability to effectively respond given the resources we currently have versus what our needs are down the road. It's not a question, just a comment.
I've added myself to the queue again to ask a follow-up question, City Manager, because one of Councillor Evans' questions made me wonder about this. You mentioned that with the establishment of the district, that would be immediately at sort of the ceiling of the permanent rate. Does that mean that its growth runs into the very same challenges we've spent a significant amount of this year grappling with, which is that greater than 3% growth in costs exceeds your property tax increment increase?
Yeah, they would be at their permanent tax rate. And then if you just looked at the Eugene growth numbers, our property taxes grown around 3.5% over the last 5 to 10 years. So they would be limited by that growth for the rest of time unless they levy.
Okay.
Not that same number, it changes every year.
Right.
That's why I use the data point of like looking at this year's permit and construction data. I don't think that next year is going to have higher growth. In fact, I'll be surprised if it's not lower.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Councilors, any other follow-up questions today? I know there are probably a lot of people who are following along at home digesting this information and that presentation. I will share, City Manager, that I think a lot of people in our community would benefit from understanding more about some of the complicating factors that you walked through quickly. Very appreciated. It reflects the importance and the complexity of this work that's before us. Council, not seeing any other final questions from you all today, and knowing that we will continue this conversation, I want to be sure to say two things in closing. First of all, just to express my gratitude and appreciation to Chief Caven, all of our firefighters, our first responders, all of the people who are part of this staff that are always available when needed. And we are grateful for that work and that service. I also really appreciate something that Councillor Groves highlighted in this presentation, which is that even as we've been in a process of functional merger for a number of years, and still with this question about governance before us, we have already extracted significant value from those years of work together, and that coordination of training and equipment and on-site protocols and procedures. I cannot imagine, Councillor Groves, what it would have been like to have two different playbooks running at the same time on a football field, but really appreciate that value that our community has received from all of this work over a number of years. So thank you to everyone who's been a part of delivering that, but most especially to our first responders and Chief Caven. With that, then this concludes our agenda for today. Thank you all for that robust discussion and great presentation. And I now close the October 22nd, 2025 Eugene City Council work session, and we are adjourned.